is Sokolov Valery Anatolievich. I'm 62. I'm from Donetsk. I was stopped in Donetsk in November 2016 by an armed group from Center for Special Operations. I was transported to isolation, where I was held until 2018, June that year. What is isolation? That's a former insulation materials production facility at 3 Svitloho Szlachu. It was adapted as a temporary camp where they hold Ukrainian patriots who are tortured and from whom false testimony is extorted. I was personally tortured, and I was tortured with electrical currents. Some wiring and tasers were attached to my private parts and legs, and I was brought to the state of near clinical death. Some were tortured and had needles driven into their toenails and fingernails. I was also tortured with water. I was drowned in a bowl of water, and when you choke, then testimony is extorted from you. Also, blackmail is used because it is said that if you don't confess, we are going to arrest your next of kin, and we're going to torture, rape, and kill them. And those words are a fact because I found out throughout the 2 years I spent there. I know some people who were killed just beside me. They were tortured. They did not die of natural causes. Those people do exist. The attitude of persons who are there is cruel. It actually is a concentration camp. We know some places where people would be thrown into adits because the entire Donetsk is dotted with collieries and tailing ponds. Also, in spring and in early summer, there's also this deadly smell of decomposing bodies. And you can also, actually, this smell just seeps out from the ground, and the entire isolation smells of it. In the building of isolation, there are cells in the basement where there was a torture chamber. There is a table where a person is attached with strings or with duct tape and tortured, and if they don't confess, which is extorted with guiding questions. They say that you have to confess. I did do that, but I hadn't done what they asked me to confess to. I had no chances, really. And really, my confession was that I illegally smuggled weapons, which I didn't do, that I also committed other crimes, which I didn't do, and under the criminal code, I got a prison term, which I was serving as of 2018 in a penal colony in Makiyevka. Besides torture, my health has been actually destroyed. They also tortured males and females. They would blackmail them and rape and kill. Additionally, each and every procedure is really well developed. First they torture you, then they stand you facing the wall for the entire night, and you need to hold your arms out. In the morning, they just take you to the torture chamber and extort any confession they wish. That means that if you make it to this place, I was told, I told everyone else what I had been through. You need to confess to everything if you want to survive and get out of there if there's a prisoner exchange. You need to confess to what they demand. You just have no choice because they will either torture you to death or you can actually get out of their place. The last person I saw tortured was Vitya Dzieciuk, a really handsome boy. He was tortured practically every day. He survived, and now he remains at the penal colony in Makiyevka. I think there's going to be a prisoner exchange. They would notify your family about such exchange and also your next of kin. With regard to me, I was blackmailed with my family and my next of kin. When I was tortured, they told my wife and my daughter they were going to pick out my eyes and rape my daughter just in front of me. I agreed to everything, to what they demanded, and I confessed to everything. Also, I was tortured with electrical current, and I still bear the scars of this torture. And my legs would ulcerate and really smell of this deadly smell. A friend of mine who was later killed, Homolaziuk Viktor Stepanovich, he suffered injuries to his liver and died. And they would also cut slices of meat from his body because they wouldn't heal up, they just smelt. There was no greenie or iodium. We found some sorts of hydrogen peroxide and we would use it to wash the wounds. I'm not particularly special. The same was done with others, and we would try to help them when we were there. People would hang themselves, would jump from high altitude, and would slash their veins open. The suicide syndrome was commonplace. I think this is all very much like with those people's republics like Hitler's Mein Kampf in Donetsk. We cannot, unfortunately, set ourselves free from this occupation. I think what we need to do to get rid of isolation and this occupational force is so that the international organization supports activity and that we do whatever is needed to close down those concentration camps, those Auschwitzes of the 21st century. If the international community don't do anything, it will go on forever. That's how I think.
And gentlemen, good afternoon. With this deeply moving testimony of the prisoner in Donbas region held by separatists there, we wanted to start our webinar dedicated to presentation of the very meticulously prepared report entitled Isolation, Voices from the Basement, prepared by two courageous people, Polish journalist Monika Andruszewska and the Ukrainian lawyer and journalist as well, Vitaly Czekał. We have the excellent panel of speakers. First and foremost, allow me to welcome the Deputy Speaker of Polish Parliament, the same, Madame Małgorzata Gosiewska, who is well known to international community for her very courageous exposing of atrocities happening on our eastern borders in Crimea. She is well-known defender of Crimean Tatars, as well as in the east of Ukraine and other places as well. We welcome also His Excellency Marcin Czepelek, the ambassador of Poland to the Netherlands and to ICPW. Also, it is always my pleasure and privilege to welcome Petras Austrevicius, well-known member of the European Parliament, frequently collaborating with me, but actually he's really very well-known person in advocating the independence of Ukraine, sharing currently the group Friends of Ukraine in the European Parliament. Very warm welcome, but allow me first to welcome also important persons, authors of the report, and in particular those who give testimony to this report and who will be given the possibility to address us at length. This edition of the report was commissioned by European conservatives and reformists and is the result of our long-standing experience. For example, together with Petras Austrevicius, we visited areas of conflict, traveling to the east of Ukraine, places like Mariupol, Avdiivka, and doing it many times, similarly to actions taken by Madame Goszewska, also recently by, I'm indicating her visit together with deputy speakers of Ukrainian and Lithuanian parliament to the area. So without much ado, I wouldn't like to lose our precious time leaving and to statements of our important guests. Now I give the floor to Petras Austrevicius for his welcoming remarks. Petras, floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, as well as excellent event, once again highlighting those things, those terrible things, unjust things, which are still going on in quite a part of Ukraine's territory called Donbass, under the occupation of Russian Federation, and those militia which was organized just to illustrate so-called drive for separatism, or as they call independence from Ukraine. Indeed, for me, this report called Isolation, coming out from this production site in the area, is again, it's a a grave reminder of 20th century. I mean, it's like a reproduction of those terrifying stories which happened to be in Russia in the 30s, then in 40s and 50s. Again, same happened in Nazi Germany. So those methods are, or they have been well employed by NKVD, KGB, Gestapo, all those institutions which were trying to, crack down and to simply to take away any dignity of people. And it's really amazing to see those torture methods absolutely unhuman, because well, even listening to the first testimony of a man, well, you might imagine that it can't be true. I mean, there are people who are ready and do it against other people who I believe did nothing. I mean, they have no guilt. They have no any crime on their hands at all. But there are those ready people who are employed by so-called republics under the supervision of FSB or GRU from the Russian Federation, and they make experiments on those people. And this is, again, the 21st century of humanity, of development, of new great initiatives, and so on and so forth. But there are some territories, isolated territories, where this torture and crime against humanity is a matter of reality. And thank you very much for those brave journalists who did this great job. It's indeed something which is so needed, because only by this we can prove the crime against humanity. We can call for responsibility on those who did that. And there are, as I said, physical men. There are physical presence of those evil on the ground, and they will not persist existing unless we take some steps. This physical and psychological torture of systematic nature, as well reported in this analysis, it is something. I mean, it's not just one by one. it's a systematic, it's working mass production torture, which is unbelievable because, why this should be happening in eastern Ukraine? What Ukrainians did wrong to the Russian Federation? Why this unbelievable crime level from 20th century should be reproduced now? So that's why calling for responsibility, I think it's very important. Call things the right names as well. It's so important. And, documenting those crimes is something which I believe one day will come on international court against those and against that country which instigated all those crimes and, international crimes as well. Because, everything started from annexation, occupation, and then torture followed. Those professional sadists which employ torture as a method to break down innocent people, women, men, in not just in dozens, but in hundreds and thousands. I think this is something which should catch the attention of international media and politicians much more than now. So that's why, thank you, Anna, once again, organizing this event. It's so important, and it's great to have this report in English. We will try to spread out this information as much as possible, because for the time of being, Donbass crimes are getting to be a kind of forgotten story. We are taken by new events wherever it is, and we pretend, to not to focus more and spend more time on those. But nothing vanished, nothing is gone. Everything is in place, and a system of evil is there. So that's why bringing awareness and information is something what normal politicians have to do, and you do it, Anna. Thank you so much. And report in English will serve a very good purpose in this regard. And secondly, I think we have to take into attention kind of life stories and continuing life of those who escaped from prisons, from this concentration camp or concentration camps which are established in Donbass, and probably try to assist former prisoners with psychological or physical rehabilitation to be supported by the European Union, because we are moved by idea of humanity. So that's why we can't stay aside and look only or document only the crimes. We have to assist those victims who survived and escaped from those concentration camps, in order to, help their remaining life to be much better than it was for some time. So that's why probably we have, after this event, Anna, together write a kind of letter to the European Commission asking and supporting the idea of special, even very slim, but nevertheless present special program for rehabilitation of those victims, because simply, humanity asks us for something. We can't just be observers in this kind of fight for humanity on our side, and try to enlarge system of evil on us from the eastern side. So that's why, once again, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward for our cooperation in this regard in future. Thank you.
This very precise statement. Yes, I'm quite sure that our cooperation brings a really good result at the level of European Parliament. Thank you once more. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is my pleasure and privilege to present the keynote speaker, main speaker of this event, Madam Deputy Speaker of Polish Parliament, lower chamber of Polish Parliament, the same, and person very much dedicated to freedom of our eastern neighborhood, and in particular exposing a variety of atrocities in the east, in Ukraine. Pani marszałek, bardzo proszę.
Dobrze. Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much for this opportunity actually be part of this special conference. I would like to extend my gratitude to Ms. Anna Fotyga, MEP, for her courage to speak out the truth and to take on those difficult matters on the forum of the European Parliament. But I would also like to extend my gratitude and thanks to Monika Andruszewska, a brilliant journalist who's been incredibly committed, working to the benefit for those people who look after their next of kin, be them alive or dead. Mostly they are mothers and wives and daughters, but also fathers who dramatically look forward to see their nearest and dearest to come back, and they await some support from the international community in this search effort. We have seen this dramatic account of the person who was held prisoner and tortured and who survived and can now give first-hand accounts. And there are many more such accounts in the report compiled in the report. And equally dramatic accounts have been also provided in this report on Russian war crimes committed in eastern Ukraine in 2014, because this has been ongoing since 2014. And I cannot understand at all why there is no organized effort of the international community and international organizations. We do remember a variety of events related to kidnapping of journalists and also international charities that would be kidnapped by Islamist terrorists, and how much the entire international community would be moved and actually called to action to try and release such prisoners. But speaking of Ukrainians, or those from the occupied Crimea or in Donbass, we don't see such efforts. This is something that doesn't seem to interest the media or Western politicians. This is quite akin to turning a blind eye to war crimes committed. At the time of World War II, there were reports and first-hand accounts and witness accounts, and there was silence and indifference. And I think this silence and indifference affects families, first and foremost, who feel just solitary in their pursuits. They are not left to themselves owing to Ms. Monika Andruszewska or Ms. Minister Fotyga. I've been trying to lend some limelight to these matters, but we have to work together to move the international community. I sometimes wonder what the International Red Cross has done about this matter. This is something that has been asked time and time again in questions asked of us by the families awaiting their next of kin, their return from prisons. It's an organization whose main objective is to support the victim of armed conflict. We have this censored rescue and search and rescue agency and a number of instruments that could be deployed here. I have no idea if they are, but from the accounts of family members, I dare say nothing has been ongoing in this matter. There seems to be a conspiracy of silence. There are hundreds of persons, those are not individual cases. This has been ongoing for 7 years now and nothing has happened. with regard to response. A number of reports have been compiled, and there are also accounts of reporters, so we cannot say that the world does not know, that politicians haven't heard of it, but they do not want to see it because it's the Russian Federation that's just across the table, and it is highly difficult to take on this opponent. I think that's the reason for this silence and indifference. I believe this conference and the opportunity to present these reports and to lend the limelight to the persons who had suffered themselves is a lot, but still not enough. As I think the first report that was compiled for 2014, it was presented on the forum of the European Parliament, and Ms. Minister had organized the presentation of this report. And there were a lot of accounts of survivors. What has been said by Mr. Valerian Anatolievich Sokolov, I listened to it while compiling this report. It is also published in English and French. The only effort is just to actually read it. It has been filed with the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and I hope to see an instigation of proceedings in this matter in mid-2021. And we hope to hear such information shared today by Mr. Ambassador Sabelov, whom I would like to thank for taking part in this conference. Georgia awaited 7 years until the International Criminal Court at The Hague instigated proceedings. So we've also seen 7 years since the start of this tragedy in Donbas. It's been 7 long years, but we hope that the process starts. We would like those criminals not to feel just free and be under remit of international community. We've heard Mr. Pedras Ostrevich's MEP that we need to provide support for survivors and we need to work on their rehabilitation. But first and foremost, we need to act that such persons be released, the hundreds of those who are held under dramatic circumstances. And this is the first and fundamental step, to have them released, to provide them with medical assistance, send parcels, and also what the Central Search Agency could provide is to certify that those persons are held, because families cannot go to occupied Donbas. Us as politicians engaged in the matter of Eastern policies, broadly understood, we cannot visit those areas because we wouldn't come back. This is what the international institutions have been established for. They have it in their budgets and tasks and their mission, and this is what they should do. And this is what families await, the families of those who are held there. How am I to look in the eyes of a mother that I met, who had been waiting for her child to return for so many years now? She sees someone who can do in me as I represent the Polish Parliament. And I feel just deprived of any force. At times, I have visited Donbas lately. I have also organized this Lublin Triangle, parliamentary circles with the deputy speakers of Lithuanian and Ukrainian parliaments, when we heard those rising tensions across the border, when there was a lot of shelling, and we spoke out and said no to the Russian Federation, but we also urged the international community to take action, because this is the only way we could possibly think of seeing this conflict to an end. And also the word of conflict, it's quite convenient for politicians. It's not conflict, it's a war. It's a war, and let's call it what it is. Conflict is a euphemism, and one could just go back to business as usual over conflict. But there's been a war ongoing there for 7 years. I have also met children, first graders, who have lived all their lives under war with fear of tomorrow and running to bomb shelters on a daily basis. Those are not conditions under which anyone should live, especially children. Whenever you travel across Donbas, the most frequently seen plate you can see is landmines. That's the most frequent item of information you can see all over the place. Those are areas full of landmines currently, and the Luhansk and Donetsk terrorists had buried thousands of mines all over the place, also with the support of the Russian Federation, which needs to be spoken out. Those are mines dropped by drones near residential housing, i.e. targeting civilians to rein them by fear. This is how those persons are forced to live. And those dramatic accounts of former prisoners at this, and actual prisoners at this conference, is dedicated to. I remember the first person I spoke to, because my history of championing and shedding spotlight on the Donbas was me assisting with charity and humanitarian aid. I heard the first accounts of torture. Those were just individual cases, and reporters picked up the topics, and it seemed to have been sporadic, dramatic, terrible, but we had no idea of the scale of abuse and atrocities. And it wasn't until I spoke to those persons, it turned out those were hundreds of persons. There's regular murder taking place and torture. We see torture as an attempt at extorting important information for the other party. Questionable, but let's assume there was a point to it. No, but there's a lot of torture just for fun. Drunk persons who are actually under the influence of drugs, they inflict terrible physical and mental pain, and they kill just for fun. That's the war that goes on in there. But we also need to remember those are not actually just packs of criminal types and groups of bandits, but that's a system introduced by the Russian Federation from the inception of the so-called People's Republics in the east of Ukraine, because the first activity was to release criminals from prisons and to arm them, and those were the ones who organized the first so-called militias in the occupied Donbas. Amongst the victims and who are held prisoner, we see a number of persons who had been so-called convicted. We have a male who was handed a 10-year prison sentence, and he's 70, and he's gravely ill. But those convictions returned by non-existing courts of non-existing countries, so they have no legal standing. And what has the world done? Well, yeah, he's imprisoned, there's a sentence. What does the International Red Cross do? I apologize for the emotion, but I cannot speak about dramatic matters in a cool voice. Perhaps that's why I engage so much and commit to it. Again, I would like to thank Ms. Monika Andruszewska for her heart, for her being with those families and supporting those families, that those families have organized themselves, that they don't speak out in individual voices, but they speak out in a chorus, and that they show the scale of abuse. And that scale of war crime committed in Donbas and in the Crimea, backed by the Russian Federation, we need to relay it to the world. And we also need to champion the cause that those persons can go back to decent lives. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Ms. Speaker.
Speaker for her excellent, maybe emotional, but very true statement, and actually very necessary to listen to for many of our viewers. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose the following sequence of events during this webinar. Now allow me to present our excellent authors of this report. We mentioned already both of them. Allow me to introduce a very special person, Polish journalist Monika Andruszewska, brave lady who instigated this activity, this report. Actually, it is a follow-up of her activity on the ground there in Donbas, in eastern part of Ukraine. Allow me to give the floor to first Monika Andruszewska, and then co-author of this report, excellent Ukrainian lawyer and journalist Witali Czekało. Pani Moniko, bardzo proszę.
Ms. Monika, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to extend my thanks to Ms. Anna Fotyga and her consistent stance on Ukraine. And we owe it to her the fact that we can talk about the report we've just compiled. I also need to stress the role of Ms. Deputy Speaker and her caring about the drama that has been ongoing in Donbas. She's been an inspiration and support to all of us and all those who have experienced illegal imprisonment in Russia. It's isolation, secret black spots in Donbas that former prisoners call contemporary concentration camps, and that's something that actually is quite straightforward when we hear it, because holding prisoner with beating and violence was supposed to destroy the individuality of a person and also to pull them into the structures of this criminal system. The prisoners who were held there were forced to beat each other, to also report on each other, and if they cooperated with the officials, they would often have some privileges, also performing the function of capo that we know from World War II. From the accounts we've collected, we only have those who did not take such privileges, so they were at the very bottom of this hierarchy artificially developed in those prisons. But I still believe that the methods applied there had been planned not only to actually divide the prisoners or to get some allies amongst them in crime, but also to blame the victims, but also to hide the true perpetrator of the drama, i.e. Russia. And we need to remember that the decision makers at Isolation also actually performed the duties of those who had sued themselves Major Kuzmich, who wouldn't show up on premises of those facilities. That's why it's so difficult to identify them. And we also need to stress that Isolation is not such a place. Now we've got information about at least 3 very similarly organized facilities where persons are actually subjected to torture and violence, and there is no access to such places. And I would like to urge on the present here MEPs, because we should keep calling to the Organization for Cooperation and Development in Europe to have access to such places, we cannot just accept the fact that access to such facilities is denied, because they've been functioning there for years. And if the West does not use the only rhetoric Russia understands, i.e. the rhetoric of force and applying pressure, then those atrocities will go on in the occupied territories of Eastern Ukraine. The accounts we have collected go on for 50 days. A person held prisoner is typically rotated across 3, 4, 5 facilities, and is typically finally, after an illegal verdict, moved on to a penal colony before they are held at remand centers, military bases, also solitary confinement locations, and prisons. We can still, as journalists, perform such work. We also have access to former prisoners who can help with the collection of such accounts, and we also are in touch with the residents of occupied territories who do not agree with the terror that reigns their land. We can still compile reports on other illegal prisons, and we can forward to The Hague a list of criminals, of the persons who've been engaged in the system of repression. But we can also forward lists of persons who are in the structures that support the process, because those are, let's stress it, illegal structures. They should not be recognized in any way. The so-called Ministry of Information, DNR, or the Internal Security Ministry of the so-called courts, which have not been recognized in any way. It can't be the way that those persons would slap a verdict on a person who's been actually first tortured, and then such judges can, because they hold a Russian passport, they can go shopping in Europe. The borders of Donbas is just 1,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers, and it takes 2.5 hours to fly there. So it's just round the corner, actually. And we cannot be indifferent, and we must do whatever it takes to stop it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Ms. Monika Andruszewska, and we will ask her again to take the floor during the discussion, and I would like to introduce the other co-author of this report, Mr. Vitaly Czekalo.
Доброго дня. З 2014 року на сході України
Good afternoon. In the area of Ukraine, as of 2014, a war is ongoing, and the fact that this conflict, whatever we call it, whether it is a war or not, affects the international situation. The Russian separatists in the east of Ukraine engage in committing war crimes. First and foremost, they use torture. People disappear and they can't be located, and investigations cannot be conducted. It's difficult to rule on who bears the liability for all those atrocities and crimes. And that questions the point of the existence of international organizations and their efficacy. So we would like to first and foremost urge that Ukraine develops a state strategy with regards to POW exchanges by trying to have such persons released in the occupied territories. It should also be supported by the international community, and also Russia should bear the responsibility for detaining and torturing persons in those occupied territories. Those persons have got the status of a prisoner of war in occupied territories.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope my voice is already there. I think that while awaiting further or reconnecting of Mr. Czekało, we introduce our next speaker, and it is time to start testimonies of prisoners of war and their respective families. And I would like to introduce first Mr. Valery Nedosekin. He used to work as director of the Lyceum, the secondary school in Donbas region, attached to the Academy of Transport. And he has been accused in 2016 of espionage for Ukraine, then detained by separatists in the region. I would like, without much ado, to give the floor to statement of Valery Nedosekin.
Добрий день.
Good afternoon. I will talk you briefly through my story, how I became a POW. I lived in the area of Donbas as a regular family member. I was married. I had a wife who was a medical worker. I worked at the Donetsk Transportation Academy, and I also ran a Twitter profile. It was a pro-Ukrainian profile, and I would just provide accounts of what was ongoing around me, what happened in the streets. I published photos of empty streets, and I wrote about explosions. I talked about what I had, so everything that was going on around me. I was detained by separatists as I was pro-Ukrainian in my stance, and I was actually detained by uniformed individuals. They demanded I hand over all the passwords to the websites and profiles I used. Otherwise, I was threatened to be beaten up. I had everything valuable confiscated, i.e. all the computer hardware and my cameras. Later on, I was moved on for an interrogation at the so-called Ministry of State Security at the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, where I was interrogated overnight. Violence was applied to me. I was beaten up. I was forced to provide confession. Later on, I was moved on the following morning. I was moved to another place, and I was detained, held there for another 30 days. As I was at isolation, I was in a solitary cell. Later on, I was joined by another inmate. Later on, I was moved to another cell, which was occupied by another persons. As I was there with other persons, those persons would be walked out. We were not even taken to lose, sometimes for as long as 3 days. So we could only pee into a bottle. No other activities were possible, which really affected very negatively, speaking of our health. Later on, we were only allowed to wash once every 10 days. We only had 3 minutes to get stripped, have a shower, and redress. We were treated terrible. We had no toiletries, no towels or soap. Later on, when I was moved to a multiple-person prison cell, it was an actual cell which hadn't been adapted, so we could actually relieve ourselves when we could. And when I was at isolation as a facility, I very often heard the sound of duct tape, which meant torture. I heard screams, terrible screams. There were some cases when persons who were not from Ukraine, but the so-called prisoners of those uniformed forces would come here, and they would sometimes be tortured to death. Also, at night, my wife had also been detained. She was kept in a nearby cell, and I knew after I'd been moved to isolation that she was also moved there. She was also a POW, and she was also held for 30 days. After isolation, I was moved on to a remand facility, but she was released, and she signed a statement that she wouldn't go anywhere. Later on, we were moved from isolation to a remand facility. We were always handcuffed and had sacks put over our heads so that we couldn't hear or see anything as for what was going around us. One day, I was taken to another facility from the remand center, and I was told I had to provide an interview speaking to the camera lens, which I did. And I asked them if that was necessary, and they said, if you don't understand you have a family, you can say nothing. I was given a sheet of paper where it said what I had to say into the camera lens. Then I also had another sack put over my head and moved to another room. I was sat by the wall, and a person who spoke in Russian spoke to me with, this person had heavy Russian accent, and this person took a photo of me, and I understood it was an officer with Russian FSB, and then two more persons with the Russian live news media outlet came, and they asked me some questions, asked me what I did, how I did different matters, and I was supposed to read out the information from the sheet of paper. Also, I would like to stress that for many persons, former prisoners, the fact is that international organizations cannot visit those prisoners in the occupied territories. There is no the International Red Cross or the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation, and they cannot get in touch with their next of kin. Their families may not know for an extensive period of times where their next of kin are. It can go on for months until any contact is established. I would like to stress the fact that there are a number of such POWs as I used to be, and new persons are being detained by the day, and I would like to alert the international organizations that such POWs are made contact with also at the facility we've been speaking of, like isolation. I'd also like to mention the names of such persons who are still held there, to Dmitry Harabeusz and Sergei Harabeusz. They were both detained in 2017. Also Bogdan Kowalczuk, who was detained in 2016. So he's been held for 5 years, despite the fact all the other ones have been released. Also Sergei Mazur was detained in 2017. He's at Makievka penal colony. He wanted to commit suicide at some point. He wanted to injure his heart with a knife, but he survived. There are also some ladies, Marina Jurchan, who provided ICT class, and she's been held since 2017. And she's been there at the penal colony. Also Viktor Mikhailovich, also held prisoner as of 2017. There are also some seniors like Igor Kiryanenko, who's over 60 years old. He's 61, and he's been held prisoner for many years now, and also Mr. Stavsky, who's been there since 2017, born in 1985. So there's an awful lot of persons. Some of them have been sentenced. Some of them are really poorly at this very moment, and they don't get any support due to their bad health state. Also, at some point, I asked for some analgesics, and I was also having difficulty with my kidneys. But until I was released, I got no medical assistance. Thank you very much.
Extremely important statement. I would like to return, if possible, to statement of Mr. Vitaly Czekao, co-author of the report. If possible, may I ask services to try once more?
Так, можливо, я вибачаюся за технічні проблеми з доступом до інтернету.
Apologies for the technical difficulties. We're using the internet, so I would just like to add that in the east of Ukraine, as a result of the situation, the following steps should be taken. First of all, we need to bear in mind that the international law applies, i.e., contact must be made possible with prisoners held at those facilities. We need to also provide access by the International Red Cross to those persons held prisoner. We also need to use the international legislation as well as also adapt national legislation to the situation. We need to forward materials to international criminal courts, all the materials that have been amassed and collected, so that the guilty parties are charged. And we also need to alert the international community and civic societies so that they are more engaged in the situation in the east of Ukraine. And also law enforcement agencies and the judiciary should have an opportunity to support persons who were held prisoner in the east, and we also need to consult experts to improve the situation in the east of Ukraine. We must also engage state bodies to be more engaged in the improvement of the situation in the east of Ukraine. Also, persons who engage in those crimes need to bear criminal liability, and if we do not act properly, the situation will go worse, and the judiciary will not act, and justice will not be served. We must remember about the respect to human dignity, first and foremost. Thank you very much.
Indeed, thank you for this statement. During presentations of both co-author Monika Andruszewska and Madam Speaker of the Parliament, Małgorzata Gosiewska, we heard quite a lot about situation of families and their suffering in the time of detention, and then trying to find the possibility to contact prisoners of war, learning of their fate. I would like to give the floor to a representative of families, Mrs. Tatiana Matyushenko, wife of one of prisoners of war, businessman and journalists active in Donbass. Madame, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, can you hear me? Yes, absolutely. My name is Tatiana Matyushenko. My husband, Valery Matyushenko, is held at a penal colony by separatists for almost 4 years now. For those 4 years, he has not been put on the exchange list for prisoners between Ukraine and Russian Federation. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak out, and thank you very much for your non-indifference to the fate of persons held by the occupying forces. We lived in the Donetsk area, where, as of 2014, it has been under the Russian occupation. My husband, Valery Matyushenko, did not engage in the armed conflict. However, the love of Ukraine was the grounds for his detention and arrest, i.e., on the 15th of July 2017, he was stolen away, actually, by the separatist secret forces, and was driven to an undisclosed location. Then I found out that for 10 months he was at the so-called internal prison. He was tortured by the separatists of the Donetsk People's Republic, and he was also sentenced to 10 years in prison. Currently, he's serving the sentence at Makiivka, at a penal institution. We know that he was sentenced because he had been tortured, subjected to violence, and a host of moral pressure vehicles. So he's also one of the survivors. He was held at the so-called glass, i.e. a prison cell, which is 1 by 1 meter squared, where you can only sit or stand on the floor for a few days. He would just stand up for many days. He couldn't relieve himself in the loo. He couldn't lie down. So it's difficult to conceive what he felt when he struggled for air, when he had no idea if it was day or night. Later on, when he was moved from the so-called glass to a cell, he was tortured with electrical current. Isolation is famous for torture, also using electrical current, i.e. a variety of persons are stripped naked, and then they have wiring attached to their bodies. The electricity is turned on, and the lucky person is the person who has such wiring attached to fingers or toes. Typically, one of such wires is attached to their genitals, and such persons have terrible heart problems. They can also suffer cardiac arrest, and that such torture also damaged the central nervous system in my husband, and he also is struggling and experiencing health issues with his internal organs, and if he's not provided with medical assistance, he may not survive. He has also been suffering from a host of genetic disorders, which also aggravates his stay at the prison. Also, one of his former co-prisoners reports that his state has deteriorated lately, and he struggles when he moves around, and he often gasps for air. And his fellow prisoners would often think that he was dying as he was struggling for air. Also, apparently my husband had been told that his family would also suffer the consequences of his actions. He was also threatened with execution. I also heard the accounts of other fellow prisoners who were released following 2018. They were in the so-called internal prison with my husband, and those survivors spoke of those cruelties and atrocities that also befell on my husband. And in late 2018, I went to a court hearing so that I could see my husband in the occupied territories for a moment, but I didn't. I couldn't see it before the hearing, but I did see him later on. He was really withdrawn, and he suffers from Tourette's. So after the torture, he'd been subjected to the syndrome aggravated. Now he can hardly control his body. He struggled to move around. Later on, I found out that there are some rules which apply in prison, which are also torture in nature. For instance, the light is on for 24/7. One cannot turn off the light even for an hour, which also seriously affects prisoners. There's also hard forced labor as one of forms of torture. Independently of the season of the year, prisoners are very often forced to work in military maneuvers grounds where they have to work irrespectively of the season of the year. Valery has also been suffering from back problems as a result of this hard labor, although at some points, owing it to the support of one of the fellow prisoners, he could deal with this matter. That fellow prisoner was a surgeon, and he helped him with the back, and this is how he saved my husband's life. So I would also like to put it in the spotlight that had it not been for the surgeon, everything might have gone much worse, because back problems could engender much more serious issues, health issues for my husband, and I could have lost my most cherished person. The worst torture was of moral nature for a person who loves their country. The singing of the anthem of the Donetsk People's Republic is one of the worst things you can imagine. Also pseudo shooting executions were not as bad, speaking of his morale, as the necessity to sing the anthem of Donetsk People's Republic. It's hardly imaginable that such cruelty is ongoing in the contemporary world, and that they affect my most treasured companion. I cannot even speak of some of the events. Now Valery is 56, but after everything he's gone through, I don't know how much power and strength he will find. I hope he will join us soon, and after he's released, I, with my love and attitude, will make it possible for him to carry on living, because the dearest thing we have got is life. Well, time is also one of the dearest things, because it consists of hours and minutes, but life in prison, this is where time stops. And people go through hell there, so I urge you, I beg of you, that you give a chance to my husband to live. Please help our family reunite, because each and every person has a point in life. Currently, the point in my life is my family. So please help me in making it possible for my husband to reunite with our family. Please bear in mind the problem of torture on all the international levels of engagement, because what has been ongoing in the 21st century in eastern Ukraine is unacceptable. Please champion the cause of my family and the families of other Ukrainians who've been experiencing the same thing as I have. Thank you very much. you could spare another minute, I would like to add that the International Red Cross has been mentioned here. Allow me to switch to Russian because I'm from the East and a lot of us do speak Russian in that area of Ukraine. So I have asked the International Red Cross Committee to, as my husband was having serious health difficulties, I was urging support in attempts to have my husband examined by a doctor and to run basic hormone tests and to deploy proper treatment. But in the past few months I've been hearing refusals from representatives of the International Red Cross. They keep saying that they cannot, that they are not allowed to. And I think that the manipulation with granting access to prisoners, the refusal of medical treatment and the refusal of diagnosis is a competency of the International Red Cross. It could be championed by the International Red Cross as a neutral humanitarian mission. But I think the International Red Cross are actually giving up on some of their duties. Thank you very much.
All those statements leave us simply speechless. It is beyond words to listen to those statements. Yet I take immediately note of your appeal about other things, of course, as well, but in particular about International Red Cross. Petras Austrevicius is not yet with us. He had to leave for important assignments, but even this evening, I think we'll have opportunity to raise this issue and we'll arrange the meeting between MEPs and International Red Cross officials. That's for certain, and eventually we can do this quickly. Without much ado, I thanking Madame Tatiana Matyushenko for this very important statement. I would like to announce documentary by Alexandr Timofeyev.
My name is Alexander Timofeyev. I'm a citizen of Ukraine. I was born and raised in Donetsk. In 2014, when war came to our city, I left with my family for Kiev. That's where we rented a flat and we started work. In Donetsk, my wife's mother was left, an 80-year-old. From time to time, once every 2 months, we would go and visit her with my wife to look after her. During one of such visits, on the 26th of February 2017, I was arrested at Olejivka by the so-called separatists of the illegal Donetsk People's Republic. They arrested me with no grounds whatsoever or official charges pressed. I was taken home. They took all the electronic devices and they conducted a search without quoting any legal grounds. Then they carried me to the Minister of National Security in Donetsk and they charged me with cooperating with the security services of Ukraine. I denied those charges. I asked that evidence is produced, and that's when they put a sack over my head and took me to a basement and started beating me up. Then, also with a sack over my head, I was taken to the secret black spot called isolation. It's a former insulation materials plant, a secret, newly adapted prison. I was held there for 5 months. Every day started with the singing of the anthem of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and some other of their patriotic songs. Then one of the prisoners was taken to interrogations, others to labor. When doing labor, we were forced to beat each other up. They would also make us suffer in a number of ways, because isolation is like a concentration camp where people are just broken morally and physically. They didn't want to kill us, they just wanted to break us all. They would also take us to work to a special base at the Ministry of National Security. That's where we had to perform economic work. They were called robots because they practically wouldn't let us rest at all. They also forced us to mow landmines and minefields. And for 5 months, we had daily torture and interrogations. In the evening, sentries and their commander would also organize performances with making prisoners dress up, and they would also force us to beat each other. Whoever refused to was also beaten up. And that nightmare went on for, 5 months, non-stop. That's how I spent 5 months. Later, I was taken to a remand facility in Donetsk. That's where there were special cells for the so-called spies, and also solitary death row cells were adapted to dual occupancy cells, and that's court trials went on for 5 months. They just wanted to extort confession from me, and show trial did not prove anything. No witnesses were called at all. Despite that, I was sentenced to 14 years of hard labor at a penal colony. Then I was taken to the hard labor penal colony at Makijevka, where I spent 3 months. During the 2 years I spent in prison, I was counting on my wife, Svetlana, because I knew she was the only one who could actually get me released. I was released on the 29th of December 2019 in the course of the so-called prisoner exchange between Ukraine and the Donetsk People's Republic. I'm still undergoing medical treatment, and I try to live on. It so happens that now I work at 2 places, and I try to recuperate. We've been living together with my wife and my mother-in-law, whom we took out of Donetsk, and we've been living together in a studio flat. It pains my heart whenever I think about the many persons who are still imprisoned, persons we worked with, we would share a last morsel of bread with, and we would support each other and making it through yet another day of this misery. But now, we're just living quietly. I would like to thank to the Polish authorities and Monika Andruszewska for helping me and my wife when I was imprisoned, and for the support we've been enjoying now. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
I would like to thank for this documentary special statement recorded for the purpose of this webinar. It is my pleasure to announce now the statement by Polish ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the Republic of Poland to the Netherlands, and OPCW invited on special request of Madam Speaker Małgorzata Gosiewska. I think that it is a very valuable contribution about reaction of the West and eventual possible actions to be taken in order to advance this extremely important issue to trigger a new awareness and reaction of globally speaking or generally speaking political West to atrocities happening in the eastern part of Ukraine and perpetrated by so-called separatists, but surely instigated by the Russian Federation. Excellency, floor is yours.
Thank you. I will start with two technical questions. Have I successfully unmuted myself so that you can hear me? Yes? Yes. And would it be better if I speak English or Polish?
We have simultaneous interpretation, so whatever you prefer.
Then I will stick to English. I would like to start with Thanksgiving and thank you for the invitation, for the possibility to participate in this event. And I understand that the reason I received this invitation is that my seat is in The Hague, actually not far away from the seat of International Criminal Court. And last year, it was on December 11th, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Madame Fatou Bensouda, accomplished her preliminary examination of the situation in Ukraine. So what was in her conclusion? She concluded that there is a reasonable basis at this time to believe that a broad range of conduct constituting war crimes and crimes against humanity within the jurisdiction of the court have been committed in the context of the situation in Ukraine. And these findings include three different groups of crimes. I'm not going to go into the details, but I think those familiar with the subject are aware of that. But what is important that having examined the information which was available, also provided by the report, which was prepared by Madam Speaker Gosiewska, the prosecutor has concluded that the potential cases that would likely arise from the investigation into situation in Ukraine would be admissible. So moving forward, the next logical step will be to request the authorization from the judges of the so-called pre-trial chamber of the ICC to open the official investigation. So let me clearly say, the prosecutor concluded that there is reasonable ground to believe that there been crimes committed in Ukraine, that they might constitute a ground for the investigation, but the investigation has not been ceased so far. Why? And the prosecutor explained it in twofold. First of all, she pointed that there are several cases who achieved, let's say, the same level of maturity. So they were equally on the same stage of investigation, and now she needs to make a kind of strategical choice to allocate her resources in terms of human resources, in terms of financial resources, in other words, to make priorities and to give priorities to one of the cases. And second thing, and this may be a new piece of information for you, Madame Bensouda is going to accomplish her term in June. And it means there will be a new prosecutor who will take the office. It is Mr. Karim Khan. We can presume that the two, the incumbent and the future prosecutor, now are discussing modality, but most probably the case of the Ukraine is going to be decided by the new prosecutor. So soon, but we still don't know what will be his decision. So I hope I was able to throw some light, at least on this legal aspect of the situation. And once more, I would like to thank you. And if I can be of assistance, please let me know. I'm happy to receive your questions.
Indeed, Ambassador, may I ask my question actually? Does it mean that the new prosecutor is to take his time to reassess the case anew, or is he to adopt simply assessment of the current one?
Well, I don't think I can answer this question with neither nor. In terms of facts, of factual matrix of the case, I think it's already there. So it's not necessary to reaffirm it. The problem is if he, let's say, if he comes to the conclusion that he can go further with 2 out of 5 or 6 cases, he is potentially able to be successful at the court. Then whether the Ukraine will be the one listed. And I don't want to discuss other cases, but they are also very hard cases, very sensitive ones.
Absolutely.
So there is a kind of a strategical choice he needs to make, whether he will continue, he will start with the situation in Ukraine, or he will give a priority to something else.
Yes.
And I don't think I can get a good answer for this question, unfortunately.
Yes, I understand this. Of course, it's, they're a very delicate and difficult situation, and requiring high level of pressure exerted by international community, variety of institutions, but also a variety of important actors, international actors. Yeah.
If you allow me to add just one sentence, certainly we are closely following and watching what's going is 3 kilometers from here. So we keep very close eye on it, on this file, and I hope we will be able to inform in due time. Once more, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Excellency. Thank you for your presence during our webinar. I am afraid we do not have much time for lengthy discussion, but maybe one general question to co-authors of this report. I would like to present it as general as possible. How much, in your opinion, families and prisoners feel interest of political West put to their fate, to their well-being? Of course, we know how much atrocity there is. We try to do our best, but we are aware of overall situation, and also, let's say, of political priorities all over the world. So my question is, what is your message to the West? Madam Andruszewska. Pani Moniko, bardzo proszę. Bardzo krótko, niestety.
Ms. Monika Andruszewska, if you could provide us with a brief answer. Speaking specifically of support of the West to the prisoners and former prisoners, I think it's best if the prisoners who joined us take this question. But speaking of our message, I think we want to lend the stage so that the perpetrators do not go free. It's those atrocities take place in the world around us, and we need to approach this report and also the previous reports published by Ms. Deputy Speaker, compiled in 2016, also just spanning the first stage of conflict, not conflict, war, as we've established already. And now it's yet another prison. And we could actually compile ever more reports, because we should see it to a situation where no crime is unsanctioned. We need to, and no basement is unknown. Let's do more of it. Let's have a complete sanction list that also have on them the prosecutors and judges, and we should give it as high a priority as possible and also alert the international community to it. But with regard to the support of the West, I don't feel competent to speak of it. Allow me to give up the floor to Tatiana and Mr. Valery.
Also, Vitaly Czekało to shortly comment on the same topic.
W Kijowie są bardzo duże problemy z internetem.
So there are a lot of internet issues in Kiev at this very moment, and my internet is also breaking up. So I believe Ms. Matushenko could be given the floor.
May I ask you to reflect once more your message to the West?
На этот вопрос я...
I think I'm going to answer this question like this. My husband, Valery Matushenko, is held in prison. He's been held for 4 years, and for me, pressure on the Russian Federation is enough when he's released. For now, I think that the political pressure on the Federation, Russian Federation, should be increased, so that all such prisoners are released, because human life is the most precious thing, and we need to do what it takes to release those prisoners. And I believe currently the pressure is insufficient, and it is my personal belief. I'm sorry if I made it too personal for some.
To put this pressure on all of us. Thank you. Thank you for this statement. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are running short of time for this webinar, and I would like to give the floor for concluding remarks once more to Madam Speaker Małgorzata Gosiewska. Małgosiu, proszę.
Rozumiem, że słychać.
I understand you can hear me. Is that correct? I think my mic is on. Thank you very much. A very important conference and very important statements. Now it's time for action. I'm delighted to hear all the promises voiced by Ms. Minister, also in talks with the future contacts with the International Red Cross. I think it's the right direction to follow. I would also like to come back to my report, i.e. I would like to depict what actually those para-republics, the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, they are organizations which admitted to the table, but you do not speak to a terrorist, such Minsk formats actually lend credibility to those persons and place them as partners to talks, but they are terrorists actually. On page 124, there's a document that we found while working on the report. It's a ruling of a tribunal, in inverted commas, to sentence to death by execution by Trikov and Trikhonov. In point 2, those quotes the legal grounds for this death sentence, and the legal grounds is a legal statement of the highest commission of the USSR of 1939 of the actual war state. And this is what the grounds are for the Russian Federation, and this is how the courts slap sentences on defendants. And those verdicts are returned under such pseudo-judiciary institutions of a terrorist state. And I believe it's an important matter that we need to bear in mind, but we also need to talk about it so that the West and the international organizations have no grounds to turn a blind eye to truth of what's going on in Donbass and what Ukraine has been grappling with, and that there is a war there, and the aggressor is the Russian Federation, and they use terrorist militias for repressing the people of Donetsk.
For her very important statement, indicating the nature and actually so-called legitimization of the self-announced authorities of separatists, territories. All of us, the international political West, acknowledge territorial integrity of Ukraine and know that annexation of Crimea and occupation of eastern part instigated by Russian Federation is totally, according to international law, has been totally illegal and still is. In every document we have to state this issue. Madam Speaker is absolutely right. Usually when while speaking about conflict, parties tend to speak about equal parties to the conflict. There is the occupation party and occupant and an occupant, and there is a victim of this occupation. And in particular, there are human victims, prisoners of war, their families. Just in this report, Isolation, Voices from the Basement, there is a statement about scale, numbers, and eventual numbers, because total and precise number we have to know is still unknown, and therefore it is necessary to exert this pressure to find and document every victim. It is the role of existing international institutions, but first and foremost, it is political will instigating, and political will of main actors, also neighbors like my homeland, but actually there are many players that may be successful in exerting pressure first on Russian Federation to trigger positive action, not only withdrawal, but release of all prisoners, political prisoners, prisoners of war, and stop to exert threat on neighboring territories. And by the way, not only neighboring, it's more and more distant as well. We have to ensure that no impunity is to be ensured for perpetrators of war crimes, rightly indicated as bearing signs of crime against humanity as well, because of many characteristics, many features of those actions. There are also immediate actions to be taken in our limited scope areas of operation, and surely together with Petras Austrevicius, but also other colleagues in the European Parliament, we intend to launch new action to build awareness and to speak once more with united voice about atrocities perpetrated in Ukraine and, broadly speaking, in our eastern neighborhood. I would like to thank Tatiana Matyushenko, you wanted to say something?
Можно я еще напоследок
Да.
в заключение наш?
Yes, if I may, I would also like to thank Ms. MEP Anna Fotyga for organizing this conference. I've been honored and delighted to have met you, and I would also like to stress the fact that Poland has always been our chief partner and friend, and has always been supporting the persons who would like to cherish democracy. The representatives of Poland have always received us kindly and friendlily, and the way we have always been received in Poland is amazing. And the recent meeting with Ms. Deputy Speaker Głosy, I was really surprised how she actually feels for the ordinary persons, and also Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Cichocki. I was surprised at his openness and sincerity about how fantastically he speaks to us, normal persons. So we are really surprised by the hospitality and support. And throughout all those years of my husband being in prison, I had an opportunity to meet Polish diplomats and representatives, and I would also like to thank Monika Andruszewska, who provided me with a platform to tell this story, and she supported me in this fight for the release of our next of kin, and that always makes me delighted to see this support. I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this support and for this helpful hand you lend, and I hope we can carry on working together, and I'm convinced that with your support we can save hundreds of lives of the persons in the occupied territories. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Indeed. Madam Speaker, you wanted to add anything? I'm not sure. I'm afraid our time is over. So allow me at the end of this webinar thank first and foremost our distinguished speakers, in particular prisoners and members of families for their courage and helping us in our activity by giving their testimonies. But I'm absolutely sure that first and foremost, you help your own people. It's extremely important, this testimony. Without your statements, our speeches are just opinions and maybe just disregarded by international opinion. It is extremely important to have this first-hand testimony. I would like to thank cordially authors of this report. Once more, allow me to name them. Mrs. Monika Andruszewska and Mr. Vitali Czekało. Be sure that we are going to use first English interpretation. Hopefully we'll be able to broaden this and distribute reports in other international media in other languages. So we intend to keep this issue high in the agenda. And first and foremost, we intend to keep exerting pressure on the release of all prisoners and moreover to ensure no impunity happens to perpetrators of all these atrocities. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank Madam Speaker for her kind participation, His Excellency Ambassador for his statement, and my dear friend Petras Ostrevicius for helping me as usual in those events. Thank you very much indeed.